development. For those who are joining us for the first time today, this is our third pillar or our third webinar. The first webinar we talked about lesson planning, where we went ahead through and looked at how to develop an exemplary lesson plan for e-learning. It culminated into an assignment that each and every one of you who was there in that training was supposed to prepare what you call a skill plan on the Angaza platform. Into the second pillar, we looked at content development, where I took you through exemplary tools that you can use to curate content for your online teaching and learning. It ended with an assignment that each and every one of us was supposed to develop a mind map or a concept map as one of the tools that we looked at in content. So for today, I want us to look at assessment development. Now, assessment as a tool that is very important when it comes to teaching and learning process in the classroom, is at the center of any teaching and learning process. It molds the teaching and the learning process in that, as an educator, you need to know assessment criteria that is suitable for use for your learners. I'm hoping that we are able to see my screen. Probably Kiko maybe will need to confirm that.
Yes, Teacher Maxwell, you can clearly see your screen.
So when dealing with assessment, it has quite a number of definitions out there. But generally, the term assessment refers to all those activities that the teachers undertake and also students undertake in assessing themselves. So assessment is not one way. It's both for the teacher and for the learner. So the essence of assessment is basically to provide information which can be used as feedback so as to modify teaching and learning activities. So an e-learning assessment can be defined as a process of assessing or documenting in measurable terms a learner's knowledge, skills, and attitudes through an online method or an online platform. Assessments are used in e-learning courses as a way for an instructor or manager to identify how well a learner has understood the course content. So teachers who develop useful assessment provide corrective instruction and also give students second chances to demonstrate success can improve their instruction and help students learn. And therefore, these teachers who develop useful assessments ensure inclusive and equitable quality education that promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. That is UNESCO SDG 4 on quality education. So how do we design an assessment model? So when you're designing an assessment or coming up with an assessment criteria, we have quite a number of guiding principles that you should consider when trying to design an assessment, whether for your class, for your school, or for your county, or even for the country. The first principle, or the first guiding principle, is practicality. Practicality simply refers to the time and the cost constraints during the construction and administration of an assessment instrument. What do we mean by the principle of practicality? When it comes to tests, they should be economical to provide. The format of the test should also be simple to understand. And moreover, the test should be a solving test. In other words, the solving part of the test should remain within a suitable time. When you used to talk about smart objectives, tests should be time bound. It should be able to be completed within a specific time. The test should also be simple to administer. In other words, you don't want to give a test that the cost of administering the test itself beats logic. Yeah? Give a test that is generally simple to administer. The assessment procedure of the test should be particular and time efficient. So those are the few characteristics that define the principle of practicality of an assessment criteria. The other guiding principle that you should always keep in mind is reliability. What does reliability of an assessment or tests mean? Reliability simply refers to the stability of the scores over time and with different raters. Reliability takes four forms. We have what we call student-related reliability. With regard to student-related reliability, tests can be affected by personal problems, sickness, or fatigue. So how is your test reliable with regard to this? We also have the rater-related reliability, or what you can call the examiner-related reliability, which are prone to include bias and subjectivity. You've heard of scenarios where you in the department or in the faculty, you've chosen teacher X to set an exam or to set a test. And because his class had covered a certain topic well, he decides to test or to get all the questions from that topic, disregarding what the other classes are doing. So this is subjectivity or biasness when it comes to assessment. Test administration related reliability, which refers to the conditions under which the testing process is taking place. Scenarios where in our schools we have invigilation timetables. You've set a very good assessment or a test, but the invigilator decides to give the papers to the students and leave the room, or stays on phone. It will affect the reliability of that particular test. The other principle that you should consider when designing an assessment criteria is validity. Validity arguably is the most important criteria for the quality of a test. It refers to whether or not the test measures what it claims to measure. A test with high validity, on a test with high validity, the items will always be closely linked to the test's intended focus. And just like reliability, validity takes different forms. We have what we call construct validity of a test. What does that mean? Does the test measure the concept that it is intended to measure? Then we have the content validity. Is the test fully representative of what it aims to measure? And then we have the face validity. Does the content of the test appear to be suitable to its aims? And finally, we have what we call the criterion validity. Do the results correspond to a different test of the same thing? So these are the things that before you come up with your assessment criteria or tests, you should consider. Then we have the other guiding principle number 4, that is authenticity. What does the authenticity of a test or an assessment mean? The assessment instrument is said to be authentic when it is contextualized. It contains natural language and meaningful or relevant and interesting topic that replicate real-world experiences. So when you're dealing with authenticity testing, it involves the use of testing strategies that do not focus entirely on recalling facts. Remember the cognitive skill framework, the Bloom's taxonomy, right? So an authentic test should not only focus on recalling facts. Instead, they ask students to demonstrate skills and concepts they have learned. So how can you encourage students to apply their knowledge and skills to a real-world task? By giving them tests that are meaningful and can relate to the real-world problems that they can encounter. And finally, we have what we call the washback. So in the washback, this principle refers to the consequence of an assessment on teaching and learning within the classroom. So washback can either be positive or negative washback. So what do we mean by positive washback? It refers to the desired effects of a test, whereas negative washback refers to the negative consequences of the test. So in order to have a positive washback, it's always important as educators to invoke what we call instructional planning. So what is instructional planning? It is a process of a teacher using appropriate curricular instructional strategies and resources during the planning process in order to address the diverse needs of students. In other words, when you are planning for your tests or assessment, always be guided by the principle of inclusivity. We have those learners who are gifted, and we have those learners, we don't want to call them slow learners. There is a new term we call them time takers, right? So in developing your assessment criteria, always consider that. And you can only do that if you are a good instructional planner. So with regard to the different formats of testing that are out there, we have quite a number of them. For the purposes of this training, I'll look at 3 of the 5 that I've shown on your slide. So just to mention, we have diagnostic testing or assessment, we have formative assessment, interim assessment, benchmarking or benchmark assessment, and summative assessment. So the multifaceted nature of assessment means that educators can always leverage on them in a number of ways to provide valuable formal or informal structure to the learning process. You don't just decide to use one form of test. It's always good as an educator to blend all these types of testing in your teaching process. So the main thing to remember is that the assessment is a learning tool. What all assessments have in common is that they provide a snapshot of students' understanding at a particular time in the learning process. And therefore, they should be able to help the teacher to determine what to teach, how to teach, and in the end, how effectively you taught the concept. That's the main aim of an assessment format. So into the first type of assessment format, the diagnostic assessment. This form of assessment is generally what we refer to as a pretest. They usually serve as a barometer for how much preloaded information a student has about a certain topic or concept. So the word diagnosis is defined as an analysis of the nature or condition of a situation, which is exactly how teachers tend to use them. So you want to analyze the nature of a situation, the nature of the learner. So you'll use a diagnostic tests. They always help the teacher and or the student to know how much they know and or don't know about a topic or an upcoming concept. For example, in mathematics, in maybe grade 5 or grade 4, you want to start a lesson on 2-digit multiplication. So in order to make sure that the unit goes smoothly, you want to know if your students have mastered fact families or place values. And also they can be able to do a 1-digit multiplication well before you can move on to this more complicated question on 2-digit multiplication. So you'll administer a pretest or a diagnostic test to evaluate whether these students can be able to do a 1-digit multiplication. So when you structure a diagnostic assessment around your lesson, you will get the information you need to understand the student's knowledge and engage your entire classroom. So this will help you to inform the teacher's lesson planning, the learning objectives, and the identity areas, and identify areas that may need more or less time to spend on. So this form of assessment, teachers can plan meaningful and efficient instructions and can provide students with an individualized learning experience. Remember, when we are stating learning outcomes, there should be learner-centered, not teacher-centered. As a teacher, you are dealing with students, but the learner is in that classroom as an individual. So remember, when we are talking about individualize the learning outcomes, by the end of the lesson, the learner should, not the learners should. The learners is for the teacher, but for the learner is an individual. So such tests help in individualization of the learning experience and other process. So what are the components of a diagnostic assessment? A diagnostic assessment always happens at the beginning of a unit or a lesson. Remember, when you are looking at the 4A lesson plan in our first module, we said you need to test for prior knowledge before going into lesson development. This is where diagnostic assessment comes into practice. This test always aims at understanding the student's current position in order to inform an effective instruction. And it also identifies the strength and areas of improvement for the student. It is usually not graded. It is just to give the teacher a roadmap on where to start and in which direction to go when it comes to teaching. So some of the examples of diagnostic or pretests, you could use things like mind maps. You remember in our previous class we looked at mind maps or concept maps. You could use flowcharts. You could use infographics. You could use short quizzes maybe, just to prompt the level of the learner as they come into your class. Remember what we talked about graphic organizers when you're looking at visual understanding environment. Yeah, you could even use classroom discussion or even brainstorming just to try and gauge where is the learner before I start on this new concept. The second most important form of assessment is what we call the formative assessment, sometimes referred to as assessment for learning. Assessment for learning. This type of assessment its main intention is to gather insight about student learning during a unit, and also to track the student's progress and inform instruction. So as an educator, in your normal teaching, the class is going on, but you want to gauge, are these students with me or they are without me? Are these students in my class or they are outside the class? So it simply seeks to establish, how are the students doing? Are they picking up the information they should be learning? So this type of assessment also provides feedback to the teacher, allowing the teacher, to check in on how the students are doing and therefore adjust your pedagogy within that lesson or within that course. It is a planned process in which the assessment elicited evidence of students' achievement is used by the instructor to adjust their ongoing instructional procedures, or by the students themselves to adjust their current learning tactics. If you give a formative test within a lesson and a student does not get it right, it's a wake-up call to that student, either to look at other alternatives of learning within your lesson, because obviously he's not learning when he cannot answer a formative test. This test comprises of things like goal informing instructions, gaining insight on learning status, yeah, and they also help identify knowledge retention and understanding. So what are some of the examples of formative assessment that we can use in our class? You can use portfolios, you can use group projects, you can use progress reports, yeah, you can use class discussions, you can use entry and exit tickets. When I talk about entry and exit tickets, things like takeaways or homework, these are all forms of formative assessment. You've taught a concept today, like maybe in measurement in physics. So you give students a task to take away as their takeaway assignment, to go and practice more on this. The main aim of you doing that is just want to know, are the students on track? If they are not, can I readjust my strategy, even if it means reteaching the same concept that I've already taught? The other main type of assessment that you need to know is what we call summative assessment, or what we can call assessment of learning. Remember, formative, we said, is assessment for learning. Summative is assessment of learning. It always comes at the end of a course or a topic. So typically, this assessment is administered at the end of an e-learning course, and it provides learners with a final grade, in contrast to a formative assessment, which identifies areas that may need improvement and pinpoints their strength during the e-learning course. Summative assessment in e-learning is used to determine whether or not a learner achieved the learning outcomes and reached the desired levels of proficiency. For example, if a learner passes a summative assessment at the end of an e-learning course, it may earn them a spot in the next e-learning course. That means they have excelled in Module 1, they move on to Module 2. Our summative assessment for Module 1 was for you guys to come up with a skill plan, which majority of you did, and that's why you are here. In Module 2, you are able to come up with a mind map or a concept map. So as we evaluate that in the back end, we are able to see, okay, my learners, who are now you, in quotes, were able to understand how to develop a concept map, or were able to understand how to design a skill plan. Very good, you all did well. Or in real practice, we always give cuts and end of term exams or end of year exams. Even at national level, we have the national exams, the KCSE and the KCPE. A student who excels in KCPE earns a spot to join a secondary school. a student who excels in KCSE is able to continue with the learning process into tertiary institutions and or university. They are all examples of summative forms of assessment. So summative assessment in e-learning come in different formats. We have what you can use as online multiple choice exams. This is where students must choose from a specific set of answers. Yeah, there are no written responses required in this kind of test, and the answers are typically presented at random. We also have online presentations. You give learners a project, or you give learners a subtopic to go and research on and make a presentation. So learners will create an online presentation that delves into particular topic, which they must then share with their peers or in a public forum. So the online presentation will show their mastery of subjects, and it determines whether they have learned the key concepts and ideas. We also have creating of websites and blogs. So this is a modern twist on online presentation assessment, where learners are asked to create a site or a blog that will cover all aspects of the topic in question. Yeah, they may put in information they find using their own words and create a design for the site, which also tests their communication and technological literacy. Learners can also design what we call online portfolios. The CBC champions we have in our midst can tell us that they have been making portfolios for grade 4 learners. Actually, they have been instructing grade 4 learners to make portfolios. You have an envelope there, or you have a file, they put in their artwork, they put in their mosaics and all that. Yeah. So an online portfolio is similar to what you guys have been doing. It's only that it is on a digital format. So throughout maybe the e-learning course, learners will be asked to place important online assignments and e-learning activities into their online portfolio. This could be then assessed at the end of the term, or at the end of the term by the educator of the e-learning course. Yeah. They can also maybe create an online portfolio comprising entirely of new work that is used to determine their final grade. And then we can also use summative assessment in form of online group projects. So learners work with peers to complete an online group project that showcases their comprehension and skill mastery. For example, they might be tasked to create a slideshow or a photo story or a web quest or an infographic, for that matter, that will highlight the key takeaways from the e-learning course. Yeah. Then they'll be able to present to the other learners on a virtual platform. So these are just but different examples of forms of summative assessment that you teachers, you great educators joining us today can be able to incorporate when administering your assessment criteria. So how do we use assessment in our e-learning process? One of the main things that you can do in order to improve your assessment is using what you call grading rubrics. I vividly talked about rubrics in module 2 when we were looking at content development. Before you develop content, once you've developed the content that you want to teach, you will need a rubric to know how you'll assess whether learning took place for that content which you developed. So what is the importance of making a grading rubric? It is always important as an educator to let the learners know the areas they'll be assessed on, the areas to prepare, and how the assessment will take place. Obviously, students will do their best work when they know what is expected of them and how it will be marked. So before you give your learners an assessment, make sure that they know what it will cover, how it will be graded, and ideally, a rubric should have a detailed breakdown of all the projects, individual parts. For example, what is required of each group member if it is a group project, and an explanation of what will be poor performance, passable performance, good performance, or excellent work. So let these learners know if your group is able to prepare a presentation slides and articulate their presentation in front of the rest, or articulate their presentation on an online platform, you will score excellent, which could be maybe a 5. But in absence of, let's say, presentation slides, and you could not communicate effectively, even verbally, you get a poor score, which is maybe 1. I don't always advocate for 0. There is no 0. No learner should get a 0, even for the mathematics teachers in the house. Don't you ever give a learner 0. You know what 0 means? It's a heavy term. So a well-crafted rubric lets multiple teachers grade the same assignment and also arrive at the same mark. So when you design a rubric very well, it can even be used by your colleague in the department to assess your learners, and they will arrive at the same mark that you gave your learners. Yeah, as later on we shall be looking at issues to do. We talked about biasness and subjectivity when we are doing assessment. There are some teachers, probably this issue of competition between interclass competition, some teachers will be generous enough to give their students high marks so that they win all the grades and prizes during the prize giving. Let us always be objective and avoid biasness. So rubrics is a cure for this. When one teacher questions, how did your student get 98%? You tell them, look at this rubric. Can you assess this student with this rubric and see if you'll arrive at the same mark? That's what we call peer review and collaboration in department. Let us not personalize students. Let us not have classes as our own property. Rather, let us synergize as good educators to foster collective improvement and performance for our learners. So in designing a rubric, you need to know what are the main parts of a rubric. So rubrics are mainly composed of 4 basic parts. So in simplest form, a rubric should include what we call a task description. A task description here is the outcome being assessed or the instructions to the student received for an assignment. So what is the outcome of the assessment? What are you assessing? A rubric should also have what we call a characteristic that is going to be rated, mainly in the rows. Yeah. So you want to look at the skills, knowledge, and or the behavior to be demonstrated. For example, what you're seeing on your slide, this is a rubric on history research paper. You want to evaluate how the student did their research well. So number of sources is a characteristic that will be evaluated. If they have 10 to 12 sources they used, excellent, 3 marks or 3 points. If they have only 1 to 4, the number of sources, 1 mark or poor performance. On the bibliography, for example, when they are citing and doing their citation, if they have all relevant bibliographic information, then they get excellent, 3 points. If they have fewer or very little information on bibliography for their citation, they get less. The other main part of a rubric that you should consider having is levels of mastery or the scales or the grades. Yeah, this will always appear in columns, like what you are reading right now: excellent, good, poor. These are levels of mastery. There are labels that are used to describe the level of mastery, and they should be tactful but clear. So the most commonly used labels, like what we have, excellent, good, poor. We also have others like exceeds expectation, meets expectation, nears expectations, or below expectation. We could even use exemplary, proficient, marginal, unacceptable. Sometimes we even use just points. 4, 3, 2, 1, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And finally, the fourth part of a rubric that it should always have is the descriptor, or the description of each characteristic. Remember the characteristic I said they start at the row, number of sources. So what about number of sources? 10 to 12, that is the descriptor of the characteristic. 5 to 9, the descriptor is there. If you're talking about, let's say, the organization, the descriptor for this characteristic is can easily tell from which sources information was drawn. That is a descriptor for each characteristic, so that each descriptor falls on a given characteristic, but under the different scale. If it is excellent, there's a descriptor for excellent, there's a descriptor for good, and there's a descriptor for poor, as shown on the slide. Therefore, when writing an effective rubric, you should consider the following tips. First of all, you need to determine the type of rubric that you wish to use. There are two main types of rubrics. Go find more about them. That is the holistic and the analytic rubric. Maybe in a nutshell, I can say an analytic rubric presents a description of each level of achievement for each criteria, and also provides a separate score for each criteria. On the other hand, a holistic rubric represents a description of each level of achievement and provides a single score based on an overall impression of a student's performance on a given task. As you write your rubric, it's also important to identify what you want to assess. What is it that you want to assess the rubric against? So this forms what we call the criteria for the assessment. Yeah, it is usually part of the description of the assignment or the task. You also need to identify the characteristic of the rated rows, or what we call the rows, the characteristics. What you are saying, sources, bibliography, those are the characteristics. So specify the skills, the knowledge, and or the behaviors that you will be looking for in the characteristic. Then limit the characteristics to those that are most important to the assessment. For example, you are assessing on technological literacy. Your rubric wants to look at how students use technology in their project. Yeah, so you'll be looking at maybe how they made their presentation slides, right? Or how they did their presentation. How did their presentation look like in terms of graphics and all that? So you wouldn't wish to incorporate voice tonation or voice intonation in a rubric that is assessing technological skills, because voice is not a technology. It's also important to identify the levels of the mastery or the scale. Have a scale, yeah? You want to have a scale of scale 1 to 5 or scale 1 to 10 or scale 1 to 3. It is always important, and this is a tip for coming up with a scale, always aim for an even number. Like 4, for instance, because when an odd number is used, you realize that the middle tends to become everybody's area. For example, if you're using a scale of 1, 3, 5, if a student did not get 5, he'll get 3. So you'll find most of the students falling under 3. But if you use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you have a more scalable grading. And with this case, you can have a distributed grading for your entire class without having, when you draw, for example, that skewing curve for analyzing the results, you will not have a scenario where all the students are at 40% because your rubric was that fixed. It is your rubric that will dictate where student A, B up to Z will fall within a grading scale. It is also important to describe each level of mastery for each characteristic. So when you're defining the cells, for instance, right? When you're defining those cells, describe the best work you could expect using these characteristics. So this will describe the top category. If it is excellent, you get 5. You also need to describe the unacceptable product, the lowest level. Yeah. For example, poor gives you 1. Then in between, give the descriptions of the intermediates so that my internet's a bit unstable. Give the description of the intermediates. For example, between 1 and 5, the student who gets 2 or 3 or 4, where does he fall in terms of the description? And then try out the rubric. Before you give it to the students, apply the rubric to an assignment, for example, and then share with your colleagues or the members of your department. Yeah. For example, your department members may decide that 1 or 2 on a 4-point scale, 4 will be equals to exemplary, 3 will be proficient, 2 will be marginal, 1 will be unacceptable. Yeah. See that? It's always important to share. And that's why we say, let us always synergize ourselves as educators in the department. Don't personalize things. Don't say, this is my class, I don't want anybody to come in it. I always encourage my colleagues to always do what we call lesson peer reviews. This is where rubrics come in very important. Invite other members into your classroom when you're teaching that class. Let them assess you as you teach. And it's always then that you get positive feedback to improve on your next class. And then finally, what I've already said, review the feedback and revise where necessary, where you have discussed with your colleagues on what to improve on how to improve in. So looking at an example of maybe such a rubric. So this is a rubric that has been designed to assess or evaluate a student's project. So I call it a student project-based evaluation rubric. We need the class there and the project title, for example. If you do project work in most of the STEM subjects, you'll find projects. You can have such a rubric. The characteristics here being the organization, or what you can call the evaluation domains being the organization. Let me try and zoom in on this one. So the characteristics or the evaluation criteria here being the organization, quality of content, quality of the group presentation, if they'll be doing a presentation, what was the quality of the group research, and what was the quality of the group communication. Within this rubric, you also have your scale: fair, satisfactory, good, excellent. You've also given the grading for fair 1 to 5 points, satisfactory 6 to 10 points, good 11 to 15 points, excellent 16 to 20. Why is this the best? Because if you could have opted for fair to be only fixed at 1, let's say satisfactory to be fixed at 2, good to be fixed at 3, and excellent to be fixed at 4, you are limiting your grading and accuracy in assessment, where you'll find a majority of the students, no student is the same as the other. So, but if you do your rubric in such format, if you let your rubric be static as 1 to fair, 2 to satisfactory, you realize that you'll have a lot of students maybe at 2 or at 3. And if you're trying to do your analytic graph, you'll find that most of your class was at a certain point. But with this rubric, you have a gradation in terms of fair. You can have a fair that has 1 and another fair at 5. Yes, they are both fair, but they are not the same. So on the grading scale, you'll have that variance. And then the descriptor again, define your descriptor. For example, for the quality of content, the descriptor under fair, you're saying, if the student answer, if the project answers very few questions or none at all, fair. So when you talk of very few questions, how few is few? You'll find one has answered one, another one two, another one three. So you see, you have a chance to review the fairness there and say, he who answered only one question, 1 point. He who answered two, yes, there are still few, but he'll have 2 points. He who answered three, few questions, 3 points. You see, they all are fair, but not at the same static level. For excellent descriptor part on characteristic on quality of the content, if the student answers all the questions very well and contains other interesting facts or conclusions, excellent. So that is how you can be able to come up with a very good rubric. That's just but an example of a rubric you can come up with when you're doing project-based learning. Rubrics are not only limited to STEM subjects. We have so many rubrics that you can always work out on. And one of the main things that I'll be taking you later on through the tips on coming up with rubrics, it's always hard to start from scratch. But with what we refer to as the open education resources in the second module, you will get so many templates on all rubrics that you'll ever want to imagine of on the internet. You can pick one and modify and adapt it to your situation other than starting from scratch. And before I forget, as we'll be coming to the end of the module, you'll have an assignment for this module. Let me mention it right now. Your assignment for this module will be to come up with an assessment rubric, just a simple assessment rubric for your skill plan that you developed in module 1. So you are planning to teach a concept on geometric optics or parts of a plant. You came up with a skill plan, or in English, nouns. You came up with a skill plan. How will you assess the learners based on the learning outcomes of your skill plan? Kindly put that in mind. You will develop an assessment rubric for your skill plan that you developed in module 1. And the good thing, rubrics, you can develop them even in Word document. Just have a table, identify your assessment criteria, your scales, your descriptor, put them there, and there you have. And you don't need to start from scratch. Remember, I've already said that there are so many templates on the internet. You can choose one and adapt it to your kind of scenario that you want. So going back to our slides, other than designing a rubric, how can you incorporate a good assessment in your e-learning? Always analyze results. Analyzing results simply means that you want to analyze the results of the assessment so that you identify trends and areas of improvement. The purpose of an assessment in e-learning may be either it lets learners know where they stand in terms of their academic progress and proficiency, and therefore also allowing them to progress to the next e-learning course, as thus proving they have acquired a sufficient amount of knowledge to progress to the next level. An assessment aim, second aim for an assessment also, it gives an e-learning professional like you and me the ability to identify trends and weaknesses of the e-learning course. You have designed an e-learning course very well, a lesson, but you want to know the weaknesses of this course. So an e-learning assessment will come in handy. So, and also the learners, and also the learning area for the learner that may need improvement, you'll also be able to get an insight into that. So for example, if a vast majority of your learners are not able to pass, let's say, a summative test at the end of the module, you may want to modify your e-learning content and instructional strategy to improve knowledge retention and comprehension. An assessment will also give you an invaluable data that you can use to improve your e-learning course for the next group of learners, because learning is a continuous process. Today you have this Form 1 class in 2020. 2021, you'll have another group of students still in the same class. You might want to use the content that you used with the previous class, but now an improved version. We can call it version 2.0. You've now moved from version 1.0 to version 2.0. Yeah, you could also use this assessment to create an individualized plan of action that can help your current learners. Remember, we talked about inclusivity. Let learning be individualized. Stop talking about the learners managed to learn this. It is the learner, individualized. So as you do analyze the assessment, you are able to come up with the individualized plan to maybe adjust to the time takers or the gifted learners. You can also diversify your assessment methods. Yeah, we have looked at quite a number of formats in assessment. Always they strengthen diversity. Use a wide range of assessment to cater for different learning styles. Remember, every learner is unique. They each have different learning needs and require different learning materials and e-learning activities in order to absorb information effectively. So it is important, and this is why it is essential to offer them a variety of assessment types when creating your e-learning assessment strategy. Have you ever wondered why we have so many students who did not join maybe high school, dropping out at class 8, and then we call them dropouts? Seriously, are we being fair? That student who did not attain, let's say, 250 marks, where are you leaving that student? Or that student who scored grade D? If only we could adjust our mode of assessment at the national curriculum level, then we can foster inclusivity for everyone. So it's always important to use variant assessment methods or examples. You could make assessments more interactive. For example, you could use case scenarios. Yeah, you could use simulations to effectively gauge the proficiency of your learners. Yeah, while others may not have the language or communication skills required for an essay-based exam, he might be good at drawing. Why can't you assess that student in drawing with related to the concept that you're teaching? Yeah. If a student, for example, was to be tested the way we test, let's say in physics, yeah, with the aid of a diagram, explain conduction in solids. You have taken care of two types of learners. A learner who can explain conduction using words, but you have this other learner who does not have the correct words, but he draws for you a diagram that clearly you can see he was trying to explain conduction. Let us be accommodative. And if possible, include a good mix of both summative assessment types into your e-learning course so that to cater for a wide range of learner preferences and style. Yeah. Keep in mind that summative assessment does not provide learners with timely feedback they can use to improve their which they can use to improve their e-learning behavior. As such, you could decide to pair summative assessment with formative assessment. Always the ideal solution. And finally, as the fourth strategy on incorporating assessment in your e-learning, it's always important to know the different formats of assessment. We have already looked at formative assessment and summative assessment. So you need to distinguish between the two and when to use them. Know the difference. For example, we've said formative assessment is designed to track learners' progress along the way so as to provide feedback. And in addition, during a formative assessment, learners are usually allowed to make revisions to their online assignments, or correct mistakes, as the main goal is to modify their learning behavior. On the other hand, summative assessment is final. Learners are not able to make any changes. Ukianguka KCSE, umeanguka, unless you repeat. So learners are not able to make changes to their online assignments, and all tests or exams are designed to determine their mastery or proficiency. So essentially, a formative assessment is about the process of creating a finished product. Yeah. while a summative assessment is the finished product itself. In other words, you can also say when the chef tests the soup, that's a summative assessment. When the client tests the soup, that is a formative assessment. Tafakari haya. So another form of assessment that is taking root in when it comes to e-learning is what you call adaptive assessment model. So what's an adaptive assessment model? This can be defined as any type of assessment that is tailored specifically to each learner or examinee based on their performance of the previous items in the assessment. Most adaptive assessments are based on the theories and the advances of what we call the item response theory, IRT, where more specifically in IRT, the examinee's ability estimates as well as the item characteristics such as the difficulty are placed on the same scale. So this allows for the administration of the items that are matched to the estimated ability level of each learner or each examinee at the point of assessment. So adaptive assessments, in a nutshell, these are assessments that will keep on changing the difficulty level depending on how you perform. For example, in the first question, 1 + 1, a learner gives 2. The next question will slightly be a difficulty level than the first question. So they'll tell them 1 + 1 - 3 × 2. So they'll test that. If the learner does not score that, they adjust the difficulty level slightly downwards, but not lower than the first question. So you find that adaptive assessments will always allow for the administration of items that are targeted to the ability level of the learner. And this enables estimation of more accurate learner ability estimates. So your performance in the first test will determine the difficulty level in the next. You've seen this in gamification, where you have games that we play on phone. Level 1 is easy. If you go through level 1, the next level will be slightly difficult with an increased level of difficulty. So, for example, a good example of an adaptive lesson, for that matter.
Ready to have some fun? We are going to ask you some questions.
I don't know if you can hear that.
Question, move the mouse over your answer choice and click on it, just like this. Are you ready? Let's go. Click on the letters that spell the word mother. Sensational! Keep going. Not quite. Try again. That's great. Click on another one. Nice try. Let's look at this in a different way. Only one of these is the correct spelling of the word mother. Click on the one you think is correct. Good job! Here's a new question. Look at this sentence. One of the words in this sentence should be capitalized. Click on the word that should be capitalized. Not quite. Try again. Remember, names of people must be capitalized. Click on the sentence that is correctly capitalized. Fantastic! Two classes took a poll of
So basically what you're able to see there is that the difficulty level of the next question is determined by how the learner performed in the previous question. Such an example of an adaptive assessment that has been administered on a digital device or on over the internet or digitally, we call it a computer adaptive testing, or what you can call a CAT. So when an adaptive assessment is administered on a computer, then we call it computer adaptive testing. These tests are designed to adjust their level of difficulty based on the responses provided to match the knowledge and ability of a test taker. For example, if a learner responds correctly to item 1, as in the case of we've seen in the video, their estimated ability will increase. So the second item that will be administered will be of slightly higher difficulty than the first item. However, if the learner's response is incorrect for the second item, the learner's estimated ability will drop slightly, so that now the third item that will be administered will have a level of difficulty in between the difficulty levels of item 1 and that of item 2. So by administering more items that are specifically targeted to each learner's ability, a more accurate ability estimate is achieved. Adaptive assessments always come in contrast to what we call linear or non-adaptive assessments, which majority of our testing assessment tests fall non-adaptive, whereby all learners or examinees respond to the same or equivalent forms of test in predetermined order. You are giving a CAT, question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the learners are subjected to the same conditions of testing, regardless of their levels of ability. So you realize one problem with non-adaptive assessment is that the majority of the items administered are targeted to learners in the middle of the ability scale. It does not target the low performing learners or the highly performing learners. Most of the learners will be average. It targets the average learner. Can you score 40%? Yeah, that's what it means. If you score 80, well and good. If you score 20, fail. So pass mark, we always talk about pass mark. That is where non-adaptive testing comes in play. And they are very, let me not say pathetic, but they are not good assessment criteria. We should therefore shift to this modern testing model that we refer to as adaptive testing. So what are the pros and cons of adaptive testing? We have already dwelt into some of them. So we've already said adaptive tests provide increased measurement of accuracy for learners at all ranges of ability scale and item efficiency, since fewer items are needed to reach the same level of accuracy as with linear tests. The other advantage could be they can be administered electronically. Imagine giving your tests and CATs electronically and learners getting feedback immediately. We will not have issues to do with deadlines. We always talk about deadlines. That is something that stresses teachers a lot. Deadline ya mock imefika. You have not marked. You still have 1 paper, 2 to mark. We'll avoid all this if you are all to go the adaptive way. However, there are some disadvantages of this mode of testing. They are very costly initially. Creating and calibrating large item pools that are needed for such assessments, they can be very costly. And then the inability of the learners to go back and change their answers on most adaptive assessments can create anxiety and frustrations to some examinees. I don't know how many of you have ever done these internet-based testing exams like TOEFL to learn English as a foreign language, or GRE, or SATs for learners who are planning to enroll in overseas colleges. Those tests are basically anchored on adaptive mode of testing. And if a learner is not very well prepared, it can cause a lot of stress. So what are some of the digital tools that we can use to generate digital quizzes now that we are talking about digital and e-learning? I'll just give you a few examples of softwares that you can use to generate random tests online that you can use in your learning management systems. These are not the best, though they are the most available. However, I must caution that some of them are not free. They are not open source, but some are. For example, the EXE we talked about in our previous lesson is a free is a free software, so that should not. But things like ClassMaker, Raptivity, FlexQuiz, and Profs, these are tools, softwares. They have plans, different plans. We have the free trial plans, but of course with limited features, and then we have the premium and all that. Depending on the level of your school and what you need as a school, you can get some of this software that can help you in generating random tests over the internet. So for example, the Class Marker is an online quiz creation tool that allows the creation of public or private tests. The tool lets you define various quizzes, settings with ease, like test durations, randomizing questions. You want to generate random questions, instant feedback, choosing from multiple questions, and all that. It's a good choice to create tests for digital classrooms, courses, distant learning tests, and e-learning and or essay practice tests, aptitude tests, and many more other tests that you can. It has a free plan, which allows up to 100 tests per month, but we have the paid section that is more versatile and has more features that can allow up to even 1,000 tests for any particular educator. Then we have Raptivity, another software for creating interactive quizzes. In this case, it is not just a quiz building tool, but a comprehensive desktop-based interactivity builder with over 190 customizable interaction templates ranging across quizzes, assessments, polls, surveys, games, and more. Then we have EXE that I talked about previously in our class, second module. It is a free software that talked about this earlier that can be used to create educational interactive web contents. And it can generate interactive contents in HTML, for those who know web design, and HTML5 formats that allow you to create easily navigable web pages, including text, images, and all that. So maybe for those who did not attend my lesson last week, I'll just take you slightly back on an example of an EXE software that generates a lesson. You can generate lessons offline and save this lesson in a flash disk, take it to the students in the computer room, or send it over the email for the students to go through it. It's a self-paced kind of a lesson that you can use this software calling EXE to make. So when you look at this software, you've been able to come up with things like definitions of force, rationale, and all that. All this you can be able to navigate through as a student and be able to come up with this. Most importantly, I wanted to look at the different types of questioning techniques in this software. So allow me to open that. This is a blank template that I want to use to create questions on digital questions. So all the questioning techniques fall under what we call the interactive devices, the I devices. So when you click on the ID devices, when you click on these ID devices, it opens up for you different formats of testing, types of questions. The English teachers, I know this is home for you. You can have things like close activity, drop-down activities, GeoGebra activities. You can even import a project from GeoGebra if you're a math teacher into this EXE software and be able to save it for the learners to work on it offline. We can use multi-choice modes of setting, multi-select. We have SCORM quizzes, scrambled lists, true-false questions, all this. You can also use non-textual information on interactivity, such as you can import external websites, File attachments, if you have images, you can put them there. Image magnifier, you can use that. Java applet, for those who know programming, RSS, and even wiki articles, you can incorporate them here. If you want maybe to put essay for reading, you just click on free text and then copy your essay in the format. So maybe an example of what has been done in terms of things like closed tests. Let's look at such questions, like a trivia like this one. Fill in the missing information in the paragraph below. So after the learner has maybe gone through this video link that you had put there, they need to answer some of these questions. So once they have answered the question, they can choose to show feedback. So show answers. So this is what they should have filled in. Gravity is a pulling force. It pulls everything towards the, you see, this is information they got from listening to or watching this video up there. You can still go ahead and look at other forms of questions. For example, I want to look at an example of, let's say, a closed test. So maybe lesson development probably. We should have such an example of a closed test here. But all the same, this is what I mean when I talk about having different interactive devices that you can use to create content on digital content, and rather create tests and all that you can be able to administer virtually or on online platform. So finally, I'll also use this as a review on what we did in our last lesson. When you are designing your assessment criteria, it's always important to have in mind the cognitive skill level or the cognitive framework that we looked at in our previous lesson. So it's always important to map your assessment with the cognitive skill framework that we talked about last. Do your questions only foster remembrance, understanding, or are they more designed to invoke higher order thinking skills according to the Bloom's taxonomy? It is always important, let me emphasize this, good assessment models will always aim to generate or invoke higher order thinking skills among the learners. So always map all your questions on the Bloom's taxonomic framework. So remember in our last module, we had talked about the lower level cognitive skills, knowledge and comprehension, where I use questions like define, identify. You see, you just want the learners to recall something. But as you develop your assessment plans, let them have all these blend of these cognitive skills that you want. Let learners apply, let learners analyze, let learners evaluate, let them create, apply, use the knowledge they have gained to make something new. Yeah. And finally, looking at the recap: diagnostic assessment, formative assessment, importance of summative assessment, and then adaptive assessment. So at this point, probably I want to bring in Kiko, so that because on Angaza platform, we are developing a framework on adaptive assessment. So probably Kiko will just come in briefly to highlight on what is on the Angaza platform with regard to adaptive assessment, because we want to be unique. We want to create a slightly different way of doing things when it comes to assessment. This is a model that has not really been embraced well in the country, especially in the national curriculum. But we want to prepare you teachers so that as we talk about competence-based curriculum, when they'll be training you on modes of assessment and adaptive assessment, you'll say, this thing I know, let me train my teachers. I will show them what this is. I learned this on an Angaza platform. So Kiko, if you're there, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Teacher Maxwell, for that very enlightening session. And so, yes, thank you so much. I want to just quickly, less than 5 minutes, to walk you through about what we speak about adaptive assessments. And then also, I'll also take you to the platform and show you how you can be able to build these adaptive assessments on the platform. So currently, if I could just quickly share the screen. Yeah, let me share my screen super quickly. So I believe you can all see my screen. So I'll just quickly log in here. So if you want very quickly to develop your assessment, so what we currently building from that, once you come here, we have this button here that's just below what you did under upload notes. We have what we call upload assignments. So if you're able to click upload assignments, it will give you, or it will open you up for just a very simple platform that we've just built for you. Once, for example, what we have right now is if you want to build the multiple choice assessments, and what the system will do specifically is for you that this system will grade, to be able to grade for you, or to be able to grade for all the students what they got. So super quickly, so the same way they've just been doing, and from the feedback that you gave is that we'll be sharing platform navigation videos. So for everything that we're gonna be doing, especially on how you querying the different subjects, or anything that you're doing, you're able to have a video that guides you on how to do that. So for example, for my case, I can do this. Then I'll query the subtopic. And then here, for example, for those who are in primary, this works best for those in primary, but also in high school, if you want to build adaptive assessments for the multiple choice, you're able to use this. And here you're able to type all your questions, or for example, you have to type a question by question. And here you can be able to allocate the different choices from A, B to C to D. And then, for example, if you want to, for the learners to understand what logic you are trying to assess from the students, then you're able to type it in this paragraph format. And then you're able to select what the correct answer for this specific question is for the multiple choice. In a few days, we'll be bringing on the open assessments, which will not have the multiple choice. And what we'll just be able to do is type in the question and then input your marking scheme, and the system will be able to pick up what the keywords are and release the keywords to evaluate the students, or just like what we call the marking scheme. So once you're done with building like one specific question, as I said, for all type of material or content that you build, always come to the Learn module, and that's where you can see where it's exactly uploaded. So for example, just because of time, I won't be able to build any, but I can check on an already updated adaptive assessments that was built on natural numbers, form 1, and then that will be on place value. And any assignment that you build will be coming to at this tab that's called assignments. And then for the students, because we are assessing them, then definitely it's a timed, it's not really a timed quiz. What they just be doing is once they read the question, then quickly, I know most of you have come across a number of these platforms. So once they select or read and tackle the question, is that they can select the multiple choice that they want. And for this platform, it's not just serving as an assessment, it's able to, for every question, to let them know, why did I get this wrong? What could I have chosen as the correct answer? Or what was the teacher intending to test me on? And once they select the correct, so for example, in this, find the place value of each of the digits shown in the brackets, 960, 60, as a student probably chose once. So I'll just check my answer and it tells me wrong answer. And then 6 occupies the 10th place value. So this platform happens in that, for example, the student, it's more of like an instructor by itself. For example, the student is able to learn when they're also taking the assessments. And all through that, they can be able to, as many questions as possible, and at the end, they receive some specific type of grading. So that's what it looks like for the multiple choice. Similarly, also for the open-ended, the systems, students will be able to take pictures, like for example, in maths where they are working out, they should be able to take pictures of what they've worked out and just send that picture to you as a teacher, and you can be able to grade that specific question that they did. So we'll be able to share with you what that platform looks like. Feel free, because you all have the account, to try and engage with these multiple choice assessments that we have right now. As I said, you just go to upload assignments and be able to query all the different subjects, topics, and topics, and you can build multiple choices around that. So that's what the platform looks like. We'll be able to send more instructions around that, and we came to say, feel free, beyond the rubric that you build in as the assignment for today, if you could be able to even go a step higher to just build a very quick quiz around that, and also for it to be adaptive, just make sure that it cuts across all the logic areas of the Bloom's taxonomy. So that's a brief that I had about what the platform looks like on assessments and how it's able to assist you in building the assessments and also assist you in automatically grading these assessments, so that it can save you more time and give you more time to spend in other things of delivering the personalized instruction. So thank you so much. So probably quickly we could pick a few questions just because of time. I know we have so many hands up. So
maybe Kiko, as you brush through the questions.
Yes.
There's a concern on the schedule of the training in terms of the length of the training. I just need to clarify that today I've been a bit slow, because remember in our first module, we didn't have a sign language interpreter to accommodate our people who have challenges with hearing and all that, our hearing impaired. So you know, I have to go by a slow pace so that she can be able to get my pace and interpret well. That's why I've been a bit slow, and it has flooded through it has gone through the 1 hour mark. So maybe in future, I'll plan to have less content, and then also, so that we need to have everybody on board. People are complaining that probably I've gone beyond the 1 hour that was communicated